Good evening and welcome. It is Monday, September the 13th, 2021. It is Monday and it's 6:30, so I'm going to call to order the Planning Commission meeting for tonight. Tonight's Planning Commission meeting will be held virtually using Zoom and in person while following social distancing guidelines. As chair, I'll be leading the Planning Commission meeting, and the public is welcome to participate when invited throughout the meeting. Members of the public may attend the meeting in person or join us via online on Zoom. If attendees experience audio problems, we suggest that you leave the meeting and then rejoin. This has usually fixed the issue. Additional instructions on how to participate are posted online at the Burnsville website, which is burnsvillemn.gov, in the public meeting calendar. As usual, tonight's meeting will be available for viewing on BCTV and on the city's website. If you're unable to participate this evening and would like to submit public testimony, I encourage you to email your comments to city staff or mail your comments directly to City Hall. All that information you can find on the website. You may participate in the meeting tonight online by going to zoom.us/join and typing in meeting ID 957-1333-2687. Once you're logged into the meeting, please use the chat feature to tell the moderator which item you wish to speak to. You may also call into the meeting at 651-372-8299. And again, the meeting ID is the same, 957-1333-2687. For each public hearing, I will open up a time when callers may speak to that item, and we'll give more instructions when we get to that time. Your call will be muted until that time. Please note there may be a slight delay due to the differences in technology. Therefore, we ask, if you're speaking by phone, mute your computer since there may be a bit of a delay. And with that, I would like to start out with the adoption of the agenda. Staff, any changes to the agenda?
None from staff.
Commission, any changes to the agenda? With that, I ask for a motion to accept the agenda as listed. Commissioner Awad.
I move that we accept the agenda.
All right, moved by Commissioner Awad.
I'll second.
And Commissioner Wallace seconds that motion. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, it has passed. We had a meeting on August the 23rd, 2021. In your packets, you should have received the minutes, the unofficial minutes of that meeting. Any changes, staff, to those minutes?
No changes from staff.
No changes from staff. Any changes, commission? Seeing none, I would appreciate a motion to accept the minutes. Commissioner Braddock.
Motion to accept the minutes.
Motion made by Commissioner Braddock. Commissioner Timmerman.
Second.
And second by Commissioner Timmerman. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Anyone opposed? That was an aye for me as well. I don't think I said anything I meant to. So we will get to the third item on our agenda, and that is the application of Eric Gullickson for a variance to allow a new single-family home without a basement or cellar to be constructed in the R1 one-family residential zone located at 3105 Foxpoint Road. I believe Ms. Dean is here to speak to this item, so the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, members of the commission. It's nice to be in front of you. It's rare these days, it feels like. So thank you. This is an application for a request, as the chair said, for a single-family home to be built without a basement or crawl space, or cellar, as our city code requires. The particular zoning district where this site is located is R1 in our low single-family residential guided area of the city. The existing lot is a lot of record. It's vacant and has been since its creation. It's about 13,000 square feet. So the specific request is also to have the single-family home be a group home. And maybe let me step back a little bit. The request for tonight is only for the basement or cellar variance. However, there are some considerations as part of the request that you'll want to look at through your analysis. So I'll bring those up. It is a proposed licensed residential facility licensed by the state of Minnesota with the intent to have ages 55 plus, that would meet American Disabilities Act qualifications. The site is located within a homeowners association, but I do want to point out that the city does not govern those homeowners association documents, often referred to as CC&Rs or other recorded documents by the private association. And I do also want to note that something to keep in mind, that the Minnesota State Building Code does not require safe rooms or shelters for slab on grade single-family homes, and the city cannot be more restrictive than that. So just a piece of information to keep in mind. So kind of stepping back, the actual location, kind of on the border of Burnsville and Egan, in a single-family neighborhood that was developed or created in the late 70s, and most of the homes were built in the 80s to early 90s. The site, again, it's vacant and does have single-family homes built really all around it. Just to give you a feel of the proposed single-family home once it's constructed, will look like this. This is the front elevation. Included in your packet are side and rear elevations as well, but for the presentation purposes, I only included the front elevation. And then a site plan, again, traditional single-family characteristics, meeting setbacks as far as the building footprint to the side lot lines, the rear lot line and the front lot line, a traditional driveway approach to the two-car garage. And I do want to point out, it is primarily a vacant lot. There is one tree on the property, and it is an understory tree. And so we do have a requirement that new development to have two trees on the property, one overstory and one gonna mess up on the name, but essentially like a crab apple or something that's not an overstory. So there is a condition that speaks to, if this is approved and goes to building permit, that a condition is that the applicant install two trees if the one that's on site right now is removed, or one additional tree. So getting back to the variance request itself, when we look at variances, there are practical difficulties that we use to analyze if the Planning Commission should recommend approval or if the City Council should approve a potential project. And these are going to be on the PowerPoint in bold, kind of these criteria. And additional information was included in your packet, which gives additional analysis to these policy considerations in the form of a checklist. But in summary, the property owner, one of the considerations is the property owner proposes to use the property in a reasonable manner not permitted by an official control. This is a single-family home that is proposed, and licensed grouped homes are allowed by state statute and allowed within single-family zones, and actually they're considered to be single-family homes in the eyes of the state. The plight of the landowner is due to circumstances unique to the property, not created by the landowner. It's an existing lot of record. The home is expected to be built to accommodate disabled residents. It does meet the zoning requirements, but for the basement or the cellar. And the approval would be a reasonable accommodation for the expected residents within the property, again, meeting the ADA requirements. And I noted in the staff report, a lot of times when you see projects come to the Planning Commission, it may be for an odd-shaped lot or a physical impediment going through a property, like large electrical lines going through maybe the middle of a property. And so you're making a recommendation on the particular property. And again, it's more based off the land itself, but I just wanted to point out these other items too for consideration. The variance, if granted, will not alter the essential character of the locality. Again, it's a single-family home. It does meet the city zoning requirements in regards to setbacks, height, materials, all the things we look for when going through the code, the zoning code. It meets those requirements, except for that condition about the tree, which would be a condition of approval. And it is allowed by state statute and deemed compatible by the state. Planning considerations, there was a neighborhood meeting hosted by the applicant here at City Hall on September 2nd. In your packet, there is a summary of the responses that we received from the attendees, and ranging from concerns with compatibility with the neighborhood, concerned about perhaps people parking in the neighborhood, or employees smoking near their property in the neighborhood, and a series of other comments. So that is included in your packet, and just wanted to point that out as well. Another consideration, again, as mentioned multiple times in the presentation, the city doesn't regulate group homes. They are allowed by state statute. This would be a reasonable accommodation per ADA, or American Disabilities Act, and federal fair housing. There is a condition to recommend additional landscaping, or that tree or trees, and staff is supportive of the request. So with that, staff does recommend approval of the variance with the one condition related to the tree. I do want to note that variances aren't, we don't have public hearings, but we welcome public testimony. So in a traditional sense, you may hear the chair open a public hearing at a certain time, then close it at a certain time. We're certainly going to welcome comments, but I just wanted to point out that little difference that you'll see tonight. Certainly, if there's any questions, the applicant is in the audience to help answer any questions. If there's any technical questions regarding state statute, or legal questions, we do have our city attorney, Jared Shepard, here with us tonight. And with that, I will turn it back over to you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Dean. Before we get into the applicant or anything, I want to ask the commission, do you have any questions for Ms. Dean? Commissioner Timmerman.
Ms. Dean, so when you say that state building code no longer requires a cellar or a basement, does that mean that as we are rewriting our city ordinances right now, that's something we need to look at to remove from our ordinances so we're in line with the city building codes?
City staff will be recommending to remove the basement and cellar regulation within the city code. And you'll see that later tonight as part of our discussion of the R1 and R1A zoning code discussion.
Okay, thank you.
Any other commissioners? Commissioner Watt.
Thank you for a great presentation. I'm not opposed to a slab on grade house, and I know we're going to discuss this at the end of our meeting when we're talking about changes to the R1 code. Does this mean that if this project, let's say we change the code in 6 months, 6 months from now, this project would be able to go through without a variance if we change the code, is that correct?
That would be correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Ms. Dean? With that, I think I would like to have the applicant come up and speak with us if possible. And as you do, can you please state your name and address for the record?
Yes, my name's Eric Gullickson, and my address at my residence or the property address?
I believe it's
3105 Foxpoint Road.
residence one, the residence address, your residence.
1187 105th Street, East Invergrove Heights is where I
Okay.
reside.
Perfect, thank you. Thank you. I will start out with a question for you. There is two properties in this area. One is 3108 Foxpoint Circle that is owned by the Foxpoint Circle LLC. Is that your property as well?
It is not.
Okay.
Nope, I'm not affiliated with that property at all, and I actually don't know who owns it or have had any contact with them. I think it's coincidental that they are maybe doing something similar to us. I've never spoken with them, but I have
Okay.
heard that from neighbors. So.
All right, that answers that question. I was interested if that was another group home or if that,
I don't actually know if it is. I just heard from a neighbor that it may be.
okay.
So.
Do you have any What is the reasoning behind not putting the basement into the
So
house?
accessibility, you know, the residents here, most of them will be immobile or restricted to wheelchairs or walkers. They're 55 plus, and they, obviously this being a group home, there's gonna be 24/7 care there. And so the other homes we've built do not have any steps, and that is essentially a great benefit, as being steps are a trip hazard, and just accessibility. So no step from the garage into the house if there's inclement weather, and somebody's, you know, coming or going, or staff are helping residents back from a doctor's appointment or whatever. They can essentially drive the car right in the garage, close the door, and access new wheelchair and roll right in the house. Be no ramp in the garage. It's just, everything is one level, even from the driveway into the front door. It's all one level. So
How is parking handled on your other sites? Is there
yeah,
cars?
you know, typically there's average around 2 employees that are healthcare workers at one time, and they, you know, they can park in the garage, and they also can park right out in front, and they do park in the driveway and not on the street. So in our other residences, there's always a large driveway, a decent sized driveway, 2-car garage minimum, and then in this instance, it'll be a concrete driveway, and you can see from the survey that it's a long driveway. After we meet the setback and then the boulevard, there's about 14 or 15 feet. It's easy to fit. I guess you could probably fit 2 cars deep in that driveway. So.
Commissioners, any other questions for Mr. Gullickson? Commissioner Awad?
Thank you. So you're the applicant, are you the builder, or are you gonna be operating the facility?
I'm
or doing
the builder owner. We do contract with Home Healthcare Company, and they are here as well. Marta is here, and she can speak if you have any questions concerning the healthcare side of things. So I just do the construction and the real estate part. And I don't have anything to do with the operations of the care facility. So if you would like to speak with, if you have questions for her, she's here too.
No, just curious, thanks.
Commissioner Timmerman?
I have a few questions just about the neighborhood meeting. I know in our background packet, it provided a lot of feedback from neighbors, and you also had a good turnout of neighbors at the meeting. I'm curious what your take is on the concerns that some of the neighbors had, and if you have any plans to mitigate some of those concerns, or if everything in the packet has kind of established what your plans are going forward.
Yeah. We obviously want to hear all the concerns of the neighbors. And if I lived in that neighborhood, I would have had the same questions they did. And you all probably would have too. They had valid questions and valid concerns. And it was a good meeting to have, because then they could find out what we were doing. And we could find out, you know, what their objections or questions or concerns might be. We obviously strive to build and design a house that fits in the neighborhood, right? We're not gonna build a flat roof and a big commercial looking, this is a single family house that we designed to fit in single family neighborhoods. So, and we're willing to work with them as far as some architectural things, if they want to have some input. We obviously, you know, they do have covenants in the neighborhood, and that's something we have to reach out to them if this is approved. That's really the next step. And working with them to come up with solutions so that this flows down, when you drive down the street, does this flow? Just as if if this lot was sold to somebody else, and a builder was gonna build a spec house, or it was gonna be a custom house, the same things would apply. So, yeah.
Commissioner Awad?
Boy, barely touched the button.
It's amazing.
Have you built this same plan in other locations?
So, we have not built this exact plan. Typically, we build for the lot. And, some lots we, purchase are wider or narrower than others. So at every location, it ends up being a different plan. And you always try and, when you build a house, you figure out which way south, how you're gonna get the most light, which, the driveway, where's the curb stop, which side is the driveway gonna go on, because you don't want that, all those things. So every lot is a different design.
How many of these, I'm just curious, how many of these do you have?
Yeah.
Or have you built?
About 4 or 5, we're building one in Prior Lake right now, and we just dug another one in Inver Grove Heights.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're about up to 4 or 5 right now, depending on different stage of constructions.
Commissioner Timmerman.
And I just wanted to piggyback off that question. As far as your other sites go, have you run into any issues that this neighborhood has brought up as far as parking, as far as smoking, as far as irregular traffic flow? And then the question that I have in addition to that is, have you yet had any properties that you've sold that you've had to I guess, go through that process, which, the reason I asked that is that was one of the concerns that the neighbors had is what comes in here now? Could a family come in, a traditional,
Yeah,
mom or dad or 4 kids or 3 kids or however that family looks, could they go into that home without much, I guess, change?
Yeah, and it feels like a single-family home in there. However, there are 6 bedrooms, 6 decent-sized bedrooms, and 2 full baths and a half bath. So it's a nice, big, sprawling rambler. And we have not had one that we've sold. We have retained them all at this point in time. Yeah, and as far as the other neighbors, with their other sites, we have not had any complaints that we're aware of, and they all fit, like we said, we park on the driveway. Yeah, and it seems to flow and fit. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions, commissioners? And do you have a lot of traffic issues on?
Not really. There's not, the residents aren't driving,
Okay.
So we have the staff that comes in and they work 8-hour shift, and so there's cars leaving for that and coming for that, yeah. But we have teenage drivers at my house that are in soccer and all sorts of thing, and there's more traffic out of my driveway than there is in a home like this, so.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate your comments.
Thank you.
And
Chair, could we ask a few questions of Ms. Marla?
absolutely, Ms. Marley, if you don't mind. And if you could please state your name and address for the record.
Sure. My name is Marta Osgood, and I live at 4272 Sandstone Drive in Egan.
And Commissioner Timmerman, you had a question?
What types of emergencies do you see with emergency vehicles that may need to come to the residence?
Our residents are 55 plus. They are either seniors or those with disabilities, 24/7 care. So occasionally there is an emergency. It's not frequent. In our other homes, we have had, a few instances over time, but it's not a frequent situation at all. And we do assessments of our clients when they come in to assess that their needs fit our home and that they're not too great that we can't take care of them, or that they have issues or problems that they shouldn't be in that setting. So we're very careful about who, when we assess that it's an appropriate fit for our homes.
Sure.
And I do want to reiterate something that Eric was talking about, is that as the operators, one of our things is about the accessibility. As we show our homes to people, one of the biggest things for them is how accessible is it? We take a huge amount of pride in the homes Eric builds for us because he builds them beautiful, beautiful, amazing homes that are so accessible. They've got wide hallways, you know, not over wide, just nice wide hallways, wide doorways. They're so accessible, and people being able to roll in and out of the garage during inclement weather, and in and out of to the patios in front and back, you know, and they're very aesthetically pleasing, because we don't have to do any ramping or anything for our people to be accessible to the homes.
Commissioner Timmerman.
Just as a follow-up, I imagine you have procedures and policies for just about
Absolutely.
anything imaginable. And
Yes.
I'm
Yes.
curious what those are for inclement weather in your other homes.
The state does not require that we have a lower level or cellar, for Disabilities Act. But, what we have is, we do have these wide hallways, on either side. So it's a nice, beautiful, open area in the middle when you enter, you know, a family or a living room, kitchen, dining, sunroom. And then there's a hall down each side with 3 bedrooms on each. So it's a beautiful layout. But those hallways then have got walls on either side with no windows, so there is a lot of room for that, so that there's no windows, and that's the innermost part of the home on both sides to accommodate all the residents. And I believe Eric could speak to this, but because he does not build, when he builds slab on grade, he uses materials that are actually more fortified than your typical build in the walls and the foundation, or he could speak more to that, but I know that there's more in those homes because of that.
Can you confirm that's the case?
Yeah, yes, yep, we do build, anchor bolts, extra anchor bolts, above code, and then we have a bracket with the hold down weight and, that attaches to studs.
Okay. Great, thank you very much.
Okay, anything else?
Any other questions, commissioners? I believe that's it. Thank you so much. I believe we brought the whole Cedar Bridge neighborhood here, is that correct? We appreciate you coming tonight, and we would love to hear your comments and questions. It seems that there is one person in particular that was open to speak, Mr. D'Agostino?
Correct.
Did I say that right?
Yes.
Oh, gosh, good. Yeah, the podium's yours, if you could please step.
And I just happened to sign up on the sheet. There's others that definitely want to speak.
Oh, okay, great.
Yes.
This is a good time to start that. If you want to step up to the podium, name and address for the record, and you can give us your comments.
Good evening. My name is Bill D'Agostino, and I live at 3101 Foxpoint Road in Burnsville. And I want to give you a little bit of my history here. I've lived in Burnsville for 40 years. I've been a homeowner in Burnsville for 36. And I also just retired 3 years ago from the Burnsville Fire Department after 36 years serving as firefighter, paramedic, captain, and training officer. So I have a long, long history with the city of Burnsville. And I dedicated my adult life to my career here in service to our citizens. I also live here and planned on living here throughout my retirement. Bought my house on Foxpoint knowing that that's the home I was going to retire in. And as I looked over the plans that Mr. Gullickson put together, one thing became very apparent. First of all, it's a single-story home, so it's not only the slab on grade that we are opposed to, the look of that, but it's a single-story home, and it's very obvious in the neighborhood of all two-story homes. So our covenants does ask that he submit to us the plans so we can at least have a discussion about them, and that hasn't happened yet. He's aware of our covenants. We told him about it in the neighborhood meeting, and he's really done nothing to the plan or reached out to us at all. The other thing that was very apparent when you put 3,600 square feet on a lot, that it's a very commercial looking building. Not necessarily in front, but it extends to the back of the lot so far that they're going to be excavating a berm and in essence eliminating the backyard. And the reason that I say commercial looking is our concern is this is always going to be some type of commercial property. It's built that way. It would be very unlikely that my family would look at this home without a backyard and say, what a great place to raise kids. 6 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, and no backyard. It just is a very commercial-looking building. And along with that, to even more reinforce that, I talked to Fire Marshal Nelson about this, and he's requiring them to sprinkle this. So again, it's a higher hazard. It's more in line with a commercial building than a single-family dwelling. Marshal Nelson wouldn't require me to sprinkle my home, but he has required this home to be sprinkled. And we're willing to have discussions. We'd like to talk to Mr. Gullickson further about our concerns. There's a slab-on-grade house in Burnsville. Right now, there's one. And if none of you are aware where it is, I could give you the approximate location and you'd never pick it out. Because it's a two-story home on 134th Street that you've driven by 100 times and you'd never know it. This one obviously is. Slab on grade, single story, very commercial looking. So that's our covenant, that's our desire as far as that. Maybe I should direct this directly to you, Mr. Shepherd, but I'm curious about the contradiction in state statutes. Some are allowing this, and yet it says specifically in the application, a basement serves no purpose and would be an unnecessary expense that proves to make the project financially unattainable. Those are Mr. Gullickson's word in the application, and the only reason he gives for the variance. And per state statute, an economic factor, state statute 462.357 alone, is not criteria to grant a variance. He doesn't address the other areas of granting variances called practical difficulties, reasonableness, uniqueness, or essential character. So again, there's contradictions there. Some state statutes are allowing this, and yet he's clearly violating these. Okay. We're very curious about that.
Go ahead, Mr. Shepherd.
Well, I'll answer a question from the commission. I'm not necessarily going to answer a question from
Oh, sure,
the
certainly.
audience.
No, that's fine.
Yeah, if you have the commission has a question or the chair has a question for me, I'm happy to answer.
We'll address that after all the,
Certainly, I wasn't,
people that
again,
want to speak can speak.
I've never spoke before a commission before, so.
You're doing a great
I'm
job,
learning too.
so
Well,
continue
thank you. So that's our concerns about state statute. And but we would like an answer on why some say yes and some say no and why we're here. One of the things the reason I brought up as a firefighter here is I've been in every group home in town as a paramedic, no doubt about it. And one of the reasons the neighborhood has this parking concern is I know that a slab-on-grade, single-story home with literally no storage, the garage becomes storage. Even the homes with basements have Hoyer lifts and wheelchairs and freezers and refrigerators and all kinds of things stored in the garage. So yeah, I don't think Mr. Gullickson is being realistic when he thinks that garage is going to be open for employee parking. Plus, it's not just the two employees. It's the visiting nursing staff, it's family. Though there will be cars parked on the street, we don't have sidewalks. So our kids have to walk to school around cars, our walkers, our dog walkers, just recreational in the neighborhood, we're going to be walking around cars now. Plus, there's a hydrant in front. My mailbox is right there. So we're afraid that parking is going to be an issue and the garage isn't the solution. When I first met Mr. Gullickson, and I really want to trust him and trust this company. And if we have a great relationship for 5 years while it's being managed by them, that's our hope and desire. But they only have a 5-year contract with the people that they're with. And so our fear is what comes next, because this is a permanent building that'll always, always, always be what it is. It's never going to be anything but what it is. So what's going to come next? A halfway house, who knows what? And the last thing I want to say, and thank you for your patience with me, when we were done with the neighborhood meeting and I shook Mr. Gullickson's hand and thanked him for his time, he said, I don't blame you. If someone wanted to build this next to me, I would fight it too. So, thank you for your time.
Thank you for joining us. Would anybody else like to speak to this issue from the audience? Go ahead, sir. If you can please state your name and address for the record, once you get up to the podium.
Don't mind if I'm a little nervous, I don't do this too often.
Completely
Joel
understand.
Joel Poschel, 3112 Foxpoint Circle. Now, I'm concerned, I'd like to bring up, when I say Foxpoint Circle, we're a little different than Foxpoint Drive. We're in a cul-de-sac, we're in the center home. The lot that we're looking at that's being developed is straight ahead of us. Fine and dandy, six residents. Now, supposedly 3108 Foxpoint Circle has been sold to another company, and they are planning a senior home with 8 residents. So all of a sudden, a neighborhood where you drive in on Foxpoint Drive on the east side, there's 3 homes until you get to that lot. West side, there's 3 homes. There's 3 homes in our cul-de-sac. That's 9 residents right there. You're gonna end up, if this all goes through, you're gonna end up with 14 new residents plus workers in this small area. And we're talking about parking. I'm assuming they have room for their help, their park in the driveway. But don't they have visitors? I mean, are these people just lonely and nobody shows up ever at all? And like I say, we have no sidewalks or anything. What happens in the snow emergency when there's no parking on the streets and that? But that's the thing is, like I say, is we're looking at 14 new residents in a small area. And it has to affect the financial, what I'm saying, well-being of our home. My wife and I, like I say, live at 3112, and we're at this stage that we might want to sell in 2-3 years. You got a senior living home right next to us with 8 people. That has to have an effect on, our financial well-being. But there's so many ends, ifs, and buts. And like they brought up, this company, is there any guarantee they're going to stay in business? I mean, in today's financial world, they could be out in 2-3 years. And here again, so I just think there's so many ifs, buts, and doubts about this that you people on the planning commission should really think about the saturation of this neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you for speaking with us today. Would anybody else from the audience like to speak to this issue? Sir? If you can please start by stating your name and address for the record. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I'm Steve Devich, live at 3009 Foxpoint Road. I do have some concerns about this. A variance, of course, doesn't go with the project, it goes with the property. And so if this variance is granted, it's going to stay with that property forever. I think some of the things that bother me about granting this variance is that when you look at his application on the narrative, he says, Mr. Gullickson says that, basically, but for the fact that he can't, about the basement, the project is financially not viable. So when I look at making reasonable accommodation, and perhaps the commission can speak to your attorney at some point in time and provide further clarification, but it seems to me that the floor plan, the way he has it lined out, is fully accessible for the residents that he wants to have. It doesn't make a difference if it's sitting on stilts, pillars, basement, or a slab. So that would point back to the fact that the only reason he's not putting a basement in is for what he said in the narrative. It's about the cost. And I don't think that's a legitimate reason. As far as reasonable accommodation, there's other reasonable accommodation that could be looked at, not just giving him carte blanche authority to not put a basement in. And as far as fitting the neighborhood, when you look at the site plan and you look at the elevation drawings, and if you drove our neighborhood, it does not fit our neighborhood. It is absolutely not. Everything from the styling of it to the fact it's not two-story like everything else is. And of course, it doesn't have a basement like everyone else has. But the footprint of it is huge. And when we talk about if this property were to change and it was no longer a group home, I cannot imagine a family coming in and buying this home that's got this huge footprint. It's got 6 bedrooms. Cool. It's got a 2-car garage, not a 3-car garage like everybody else has in the neighborhood. But there's no yard. There's no yard at all. If you had a basement, part of the footprint could shrink. Now, the fact that the residents wouldn't be using the stairs to go into the basement is, that's logical. But they're also not going to be servicing the furnace, the water heater, and other storage that would typically take place in a basement. If it's not in a basement, it's sitting on that huge footprint that he has, that it doesn't match at all what the rest of the neighborhood has. So, again, the fact that this matches the neighborhood, no, it doesn't. It doesn't come close to matching the covenants. I'm disappointed that for all the time that we spent speaking with him at the meeting that we had about a week ago, when I called staff and asked what modifications or what suggestions has he made since that meeting, there's none. So how reasonable is that in terms of dealing with the neighbors as well? Again, this is something that you're going to do that's going to stay with this property forever. I think it's a very bad, just a very bad precedent for our neighborhood. Now, the ordinance may change in the future, but I'm just talking about right now and what's on the ordinance books right now. We can speculate what's going to be in the ordinance 6 months from now, but I don't believe anybody knows that for certain unless there's a fix-in for something, which I don't believe happens. So that's my concern. Thank you.
Thank you for speaking. Is there anybody else that would like to speak to this issue? Yes, ma'am. And I'm going to ask you to start by your name and address.
I'm Mary Cathall. I live at 3004 Foxpoint Road. And I have concerns about the traffic situation more than just parking. Because if you look at the diagram, the driveway will come pretty much at that opposite Foxpoint Circle's entrance. So you have a intersection that the driveway goes into that impacts, there's a fire hydrant at the, what would be the northeast corner of the lot. So you can't park there, but as far as available parking, if people park on the street near the area there, it's going to impact flow of any kind of traffic in and out of all of Foxpoint Circle, all of the western part of Foxpoint Road's people there. And so I think that it's potentially a very dangerous arrangement to have with extra parking needed. The other group home that's on Foxpoint Circle, there's only one lot on the corner, and then the other group home is directly behind that. And they virtually don't, it's kind of a pie-shaped wedge for their lot, and they have virtually no parking for that either. So it will mean that the Foxpoint Circle will be used for parking inevitably. And I just can envision some very serious problems. So, thank you.
Thank you for speaking with us today. Would anybody else from the audience like to speak on this issue? Sir? And if you could start by stating your name and address for the record, thank you.
Sure, thank you. Trevor Shannon, 3109 Foxpoint. And my concern goes right along with my neighbors. My biggest issue here is involving my kids. I don't know that I trust the parking and traffic not to be an issue. For those that are right around the intersection there, they know that my kids I like them to be outside, and this presents a problem for me. I expect there's gonna be parking in our front yard, essentially, right in front of our house. There could be parking right across the street, because there is not parking really closer to their driveway, with the fire hydrant that's there. So I'm already seeing it. I'm already seeing people going through my yard, coming from that property, and we don't know who they are. They're all coming from that property. They're all coming from over there already, and nothing's even built there yet. So I have a lot of concerns around safety for my kids in that neighborhood, being right next door to this property. The next thing that is just concerning for me as a resident of the neighborhood is, look at the footprint of our homes on the picture. My home hits 3,000 square feet with 3 levels, and this proposed build is 3,600, 1 level. So it doesn't fit what we have at all. And like I said, we have 2-story, 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 then we're gonna have a commercial constructed property, and then another 2-story, 2-story, and it's not gonna fit. It is not gonna fit in our neighborhood. So that's what I had.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for speaking with us today. Is there anybody else in the audience that would like to speak on this issue? I'll give you a last chance. Okay. With that, I'm going to hand it back over to the commissioners. I have a few questions I'd like to ask, but I want to let the commissioners ask questions first. Commissioner Wad.
I have a follow-up question for the applicant, and it has to do with meals. Like, when I was looking at the plan, the kitchen in this proposed building seemed pretty small. There's not a lot of storage, and I got thinking, okay, you're feeding 6 people plus 2 staff, 3 meals a day. What's that whole, how does that work?
That would probably be more me.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Yeah, so, we already have residences that, Mr. Gullickson has built, and the kitchens are run very efficiently because there are certain, dining and food service things that are, statutes of the state. So there's things we have to do, refrigerator temperatures, just all of our cooking. But the homes we have currently built by him, and one of them, we have a full set of residents in, which would be a home different in the way it's built, but same in size, and it's very spacious and accommodates all the people at a table. It's open on both sides because we have a sunroom extending off one end and a living room extending off the other end. The whole center of the home is very open and spacious. Has a counter, a center island, and it's very wide between the appliances and the island. So we have had no problems with accommodating the preparation or the serving of food.
I was more, I guess, wondering about bringing food in, because there's not a lot of, the pantry isn't very big. There's just this kind of residential refrigerator. And again, are you bringing in prepared meals, or are you preparing meals there? Is it kind of a daily grocery run? How does that work?
Sure. So we have a larger size refrigerator. We have, he has a built-in pantry there, and then also there is another, I know in our other home, we have another closet that serves as an additional pantry for us that's in the dining room area. And then the groceries are ordered once a week and ordered to be delivered. So once a week, they put in their grocery order, it goes to our office, we approve it, we order it, and it comes in and is delivered and put away right away. So it's kind of like everybody else's weekly grocery shopping.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Wallace.
Thank you. My question is more for staff and for legal as well. And since it was also brought up this evening by one of our citizens, is that, yeah, the precedent has previously been set by the house that was built on 134th and 4th on a slab home. Excuse me, I believe that was also built for ADA purposes. Along with that being said, also from a legality standpoint, and by our current zoning laws, truly what we're looking at this evening is just, is it allowable or to have the variance to be on a slab?
So,
I'm sorry, and if I can continue. And then that this is also being built as a single-family home. Yes, it may have some commercial amenities in it, being a sprinkler system or whatnot, but for our city code as it is now, it is allowable with our current setbacks and square footages, and while we have the plan for the additional tree and our green space for that purposes, that from a legality standpoint, the way that this is written, it meets all our legal obligations.
so I'll speak to the zoning specifically to compatibility. So back when that previous variance was approved, we did have some compatibility requirements within our city code. We have taken that out. That was removed in 2017. And so we solely base our approvals at a staff level or when an item comes before the Planning Commission and Council. Does it meet setbacks? Does it meet height requirements? Does the single-family home meet exterior building material requirements? Does the driveway meet maximum driveway requirements? And that's what we base our approvals on. And yes, the request is for a single-family home, which is allowed in the single-family zoning district. And as demonstrated by state statute, looking at licensed residential facilities, they are considered single-family homes in the eyes of the state. And I'll let our city attorney expand on that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, members of the commission, as Regina mentioned, under 462-357, subdivision 7, or 6A and 7, this type of group home is considered a single-family home, so it is a single-family home for the purposes of our zoning code. So the question before you is the proposed development with no basement, whether or not that meets the criteria in both state statute and our city code for the variance, and that is the practical difficulties test that was mentioned. And as you heard from the applicant, obviously this is a home for residents 55 plus with disabilities, and that the slab on grade, the kind of single level is the appropriate form for the home they're trying to build. And so when we're looking at that practical difficulties test, and this has been analyzed by staff, you are looking at how can they have the single-family home that they are permitted under state statute to have with the code that we have. And they're applying for a variance because the code that we have says they have to have a basement, which is obviously unnecessary for what they are trying to build. Another point to make, and the commission has probably seen the memo from Attorney Jamnick in the agenda packet that has an analysis of this application and the federal laws with respect to disabilities and reasonable accommodation, and the analysis that really the practical difficulty test that we're applying here is the vehicle by which the city is making that reasonable accommodation for this use. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yes, thank you both.
Any other questions? Commissioner Timmerman?
I have a lot of thoughts, and I'm only gonna ask a couple questions. I'm gonna save some of my thoughts for our discussion. But for our attorney, Mr. Shepherd, a question came up from the residents about, it really was a specific question about what was on the application for this financial consideration not to build the basement. And when you look at our background information, the city follows what is a standard practice by cities across the state, and that's to look at a number of factors when deciding on a variance. I just want to address that question that came up, and the question is, can the city specifically look at the application, even though the application only talked about financial consideration? Can the city look at just the financial consideration, or do we have to look at all of the other considerations that we do for all variances?
Well, under the test, and I think this is on page 1 of the agenda packet, the practical difficulties test is set out, and it does say that economic considerations alone are not enough to meet that test. But regardless of the narrative, the commission has an abundance of information in front of it about this proposal. So the commission can look at that information in its entirety and determine whether the practical difficulties test is met by the application, without sort of taking out one line from the narrative. The question is whether the application as a whole and all the information in front of the commission meet that practical difficulties test.
Thank you. I think the real challenge here, I guess I will make a comment outside of our discussion time, but I think the real challenge here is balancing that reasonable accommodation that is required by federal law and a desirable outcome or a desirable accommodation. And so I think that's kind of what the neighbors and the applicant are at odds with here, but I think that, we need to repeat ad nauseum that we have to look at what the law allows us to do, and that is simply to look at the variance for the purpose of the basement.
Chair and Commission, if I can make more comment,
Yes, go
one
ahead,
more
Mr.
comment on that. I think that's a good point, and kind of to reiterate that what is not in front of the commission tonight is the issue of the restrictive covenants and the homeowners association and any rules with respect to aesthetics and architecture. That is a private matter, and it's simply not for this commission to consider in terms of the analysis that we're asking you to do.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have a question? Commissioner Watt?
Yeah, I was going to touch on the covenants as well, just thinking, and this is a question for you, Mr. Shepherd, and I'm really glad you're here. Thank you for being with us today. So we have most of the neighborhood association is here, and they're the ones who, they have their association has covenants. It's, for this project, if it needs to be approved by the homeowners association through their covenant process, it appears, at least at first glance, that that's gonna be an uphill climb. I guess my question is, do you know what sort of teeth the covenants, have you looked at the covenants? Do you know what sort of teeth they have to control something like this, or any input on that?
I don't have any input on that. I haven't really looked at the covenants thoroughly, and of course, that would be between, the homeowners association and any other legal counsel.
Thank you.
Commissioner Braddock?
In terms of reviewing the city's position or analysis and legal analysis, what's important as well is for the planning commission to review and include the comprehensive plan for Burnsville. And so Regina, do you have any insight on the future housing of Burnsville and maybe what the comprehensive plan cites in regards to diversity and granularity?
So we do have our 2040 comprehensive plan, which we look at as a guiding document for the city of Burnsville as a whole. We do speak to housing policies within the comprehensive plan and land use as well. And we do speak to more flexible housing types to allow for just more diverse options for people, whether it's age, multi-generational housing, more accessible housing, affordable housing, and just a whole list of options, slab on grade being one of the housing types that the comprehensive plan encourages the city to look at from a policy level.
Any other questions? I want to start by saying thank you to the neighbors for coming out and speaking their thoughts on the issue. And we received a lot of letters from you. And I want to ensure that all those letters are addressed, because I think it is important when you do reach out to us that we do address what concerns you have. So I want to ensure that all the questions that, or all the issues you put on there, and a lot of them were repeated, so it's not going to be 100 questions or anything along those lines. The first one does not meet neighborhood covenants. I think Mr. Shepherd spoke to that. Huge footprint in such a little green space. Our representative from our engineering department, Sarah Lloyd, is here. If you could speak to the size of the house in comparison. I think someone had mentioned that the property space, green space and drainage, was that going to be an issue? We're looking at a third of an acre lot with a 3,000 footprint, 3,000 square foot footprint.
Chair, maybe I can answer some of that question from a city zoning
Sure.
standpoint. And then actually we have Jen Desrud, our city engineer,
Oh my
here
gosh.
with us tonight.
I'm so sorry.
You're so used to seeing Sarah Lloyd.
Yeah.
But we do have Jen here. So specifically about the footprint of the house and the green space. So in our single-family zoning district, the only areas where we have maximum impervious surface percentages are within our shoreland zoning areas of the city. This is not within a shoreland area. And then we do have a maximum, the front yard does have a maximum, I think it's 30%, can be covered with hard surface such as driver or sidewalk. It does not exceed that allowance. Other than that, we don't have a maximum floor area ratio like some cities have in our single-family zoning districts, or maximum footprint. It's simply meet your setbacks, meet your front, side, and rear yard setback.
Okay, thank you.
And then Jen, feel free to add on any additional information.
I can just add that the front yard impervious surface coverage is most important for stormwater drainage, because that's what goes to the street, and then the street goes into the storm sewer. So we are paying attention to how much stormwater flow is coming off of a site as it's draining into the street, which is a hard surface, and then runs right into the storm drainage system from that perspective in the environment. But other than that, as Regina talked about, if it's meeting the city code, then it's meeting our requirements from engineering.
Thank you. Another question had to do with a business in an R1 neighborhood. There was a lot of writing on that in our information, but for public reasons, Ms. Dean, can you speak to that?
Yep, yes, Chair. So again, according to state statute, licensed residential facilities are considered single-family residences. And in the eyes of the state statute and the rules that we're required to follow, it's a single-family home from your lens, from staff's lens as well.
Okay. Thank you. And real quick, 3108 Foxpoint Curve, do you know if that's a group home, or if do we have any insight as a city is concerned?
I'm not aware. That's certainly something, unfortunately, I don't have, but I can look into and report back on, certainly for the council background. But I'm not specifically aware.
Sure. And then I believe there were a couple of questions on, concerning the fit in the neighborhood. And I went through and looked at, some of the houses in the neighborhood. There are some one-story houses in that neighborhood, I noticed. There was one that's 1 1/4. I'm not sure what that means, but that's what's listed. There are a couple one-story neighborhoods, houses, and there's one that was 3,800 square footprint in the neighborhood. So I'm not sure if everyone was aware of that, but that larger house is on a larger plot of land as well. It's on a 2-acre lot. So it could be a difference in that matter as well. I believe that is all the questions that was brought up in that list. And does anybody think I missed any? Just want to make sure. Commissioner Braddock.
I just wanted to ask a couple questions about the traffic flow and parking. Is it commonplace to do a traffic analysis in a neighborhood like that because of this project? And/or do you know anything about the ordinances in regards to like snow emergencies? Any sort of clarification around that?
So I'll speak specifically just to the zoning component, and then I'll turn it over to Jen Desrud. So specifically for single-family homes, we require 2 covered parking spaces for a single-family home, which they're providing through the garage, and then additional space on the driveway. And then I'll turn it over to Jen for some engineering analysis on that question.
Sure. So typically not a traffic analysis for a single-family home. If we were to see a large neighborhood of new single-family homes, then we would want to analyze what that effect has on the surrounding neighborhood and the surrounding, but that's not the case here. So we wouldn't expect more traffic. Typically, a single-family home generates 10 trips per day. That's kind of on average. And as the applicant was talking, it seems about right for what they would have here. When they were saying, you have your, every time you leave and come back, that's 2 trips. And so 10 trips may seem like a lot, but it's about right for a single-family neighborhood. On-street parking is allowed, except where signed, and except from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. And so that's when our snow emergency routes are covered. They would be ticketed and potentially towed if they were to park between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. on a snow emergency event. But even on a non-snow emergency event, that's a citywide, season-wide restriction.
Thank you.
All right, well, we can move into the discussion of this application. Does anybody have anything to discuss? Commissioner Watt?
I have a few things to say, thank you.
Good sir. Good sir.
And I'm just going to go, I guess maybe the first thing I'll explain to the audience is that we are an advisory planning commission, and so we just make a recommendation to the city council. And if we are split in our decision, then the city council will take it up in their meeting, and if we're unanimous in our decision, then the city council isn't really obligated. They can take it up in their meeting, but they're not obligated to take it up in our meeting. So I'm going to just kind of come out of the gate and announce that I'm going to be opposed to this based on the grounds that this does not, as Mr. D'Agostino said, it looks like a commercial building. It doesn't really look like a house that fits into this particular neighborhood. And I'm not opposed to slab-on-grade construction, and we're going to talk about that later on. I'm going to advocate for slab-on-grade construction. I think the challenge with slab-on-grade is that they tend to look low because the ground level, the ground floor is not elevated because it doesn't have to be elevated because there's no wood frame floor structure. So that's the first challenge with slab-on-grade construction. And I think the way that this building is designed, the neighborhood that it's in is it's a neighborhood of really nice, pretty stately homes. And that this building, at least to my eye, looks like an inexpensive kind of starter house, townhome type house. It has a low slope roof. It has, I'm not sure what kind of siding, it just said siding. It doesn't indicate whether it's vinyl siding or hardy-type siding. It has, metal soffit and fascia, there's nothing wrong with that, but that's kind of your least expensive option. A lot of things that are described in the plans are kind of the low-cost options for a house, and it's in a neighborhood of houses that are, as I say, fairly stately. We can't regulate that, that's, not our place to regulate, but it's part of the reason it doesn't fit in. I think that's all I have to say for now.
Okay.
Thank you.
And to clarify, Commissioner Watt is our resident architect on the planning commission, so he does have some things to say on that. Any other commissioners have a discussion? Commissioner Timmerman.
To piggyback off of what Commissioner Watt said, because he's expressed that he's opposed, I will express that I'm in favor, so you already know that this will not go on the consent agenda for the city council. If that's the way the vote carries out, the city council will see this and bring it up for discussion when they meet next week. And the reason I'm in favor is because of all of the things that staff and our city attorney has presented tonight. I will tell each and every one of you that if this project were in my neighborhood, I would be sitting in the chair right next to you. That being said, we, like all of you as homeowners, need to follow certain ordinances, statutes, and federal laws, and in my eyes, our hands are tied in that. I agree with Mr. Watt that slab on grade is something that in my eyes is acceptable. It's something we will review. And just so, there was a comment that you didn't think that we would do anything nefarious and change the ordinances for any reasons that you're unaware. I just want you all to be aware that we are currently citywide looking at every single ordinance in the book that we currently have. And so this is something coincidentally we will be looking at, and it sounds like we'll be having a discussion on it, on this particular item tonight. The difficult thing here is balancing what I see as a challenge in a neighborhood. Like I said, I wouldn't like it either. And balancing what is reasonable as far as providing accommodation for those with disabilities. This is obviously a project that has demand, as we have other homes that are being filled and actively using this type of housing product. But the other thing that I wanted to comment on, and this is a little bit of a soapbox moment, and that is that sometimes we don't always like what our neighbors do, and sometimes we don't always like the reasons that they do it. But I think that if we really frame our thinking about the fact that people with disabilities do not have a lot of opportunities for this type of housing. And traditionally, and this is really interesting and good timing, but a couple weeks ago at our planning commission, we had a presentation on covenants and how over time, some of those covenants and some city ordinances have actually disenfranchised people. And what we learned a few weeks ago was how zoning ordinances and covenants disenfranchise Black and Indigenous people of color. And we have done everything in our city and continue to make sure that our zoning regulations do not disenfranchise anyone, and that includes people with disabilities. So, to wrap up, I don't like this project. I'm going to vote to approve this project, and I hope you understand that we have to follow the state and federal laws, and I'm reframing my thinking about it, that it will accommodate folks with disabilities and provide a product that is needed for them.
Any other discussion? Personally, I think that this is it's a great project for what Commissioner Timmerman was mentioning. We spoke about Americans with disabilities not having, or these people probably not having the same fortunes as others, and I think it could be a great place for somebody to live. I would not be next to you in here. I just feel that When neighbors move into a neighborhood, you welcome them in. I'm not saying that you're not. I shouldn't say it that way. I mean, I think that, I worry about things like covenants and things of that nature, just for those reasons. However, that being said, I do see this as a variance based on finances rather than a variance based on accommodations. I will probably vote no on this one, just for those reasons. I completely understand what position that puts on the city as far as the American Disabilities Act and things of that nature. However, I do agree with some of the letters that were written concerning that. And with that, unless there's any other questions or comments or discussion, seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
Through that discussion, we don't have much of an idea of where this vote's going to go, so I'll make a motion to approve it as the city has presented for consideration by the city council at their next meeting. So I am making a motion to approve the variance with the condition of the trees as Ms. Dean outlined.
I have a motion on the floor. Do I have a second? Commissioner Braddock?
I second the motion to approve the variance.
Okay, a motion was made by Commissioner Timmerman, second by Commissioner Braddock. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed, please say nay.
Nay.
Nay. And the motion passes. It will be brought before the city council, I believe, on Tuesday, September the 21st at 5:30 in these very chambers. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you for your being willing to step up and be brave and speak to the city on TV. This is, I mean, it does take a lot, so we appreciate y'all coming in. And that will conclude that item. On to the next item, which is also going to be a fun little thing for all of us. It is the application of Burnsville Center Capital Holding LLC for a planned unit development amendment, variance to Title 11 Subdivisions and preliminary and final plat of Burnsville Center, 3rd edition, for subdivision of property at the Burnsville Center located at 801 County Road 42 West. Here to speak on that is our city planner, Sarah Madden. Ms. Madden, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Planning Commissioners. I'll give just a couple seconds for everyone to vacate the room. They seem to be doing it quietly. So this evening's application, there's a number of land use clearances associated with this subdivision proposal by the new, within the last year or so, owner of the Burnsville Center Mall here in Burnsville. So the Burnsville Center site, as I'm sure you are all familiar with, is south of County Road 42 in Burnsville. It's zoned mixed use with a planned unit development and a guided land use mixed use as well. The site is just shy of 50 acres, and I want to point out that when I say that, I mean the sites in this plat and that are owned by Burnsville Center Capital Holding, not the entirety of the mall. So these are common ownership of the Central Mall, some parking fields, satellite buildings, including the Dick's Sporting Goods site to the north. So the site is bound by County Road 42 to the north, Buck Hill Road and 35W to the east, and then Burnhaven Drive, which would be to the west and the south of it. The mall was constructed in the 70s, was approved in 1973 by the city council with a plat of subdivision of the mall with considerations to return to the village board for continued frequent meetings where every aspect of the planning for the site was undertaken by the village council at that time. So it does have a long history of PUD amendments and CUPs, conditional use permits on the site. Probably, if I had to estimate for you, almost 30 files that went to the Planning Commission and City Council just in our planning case files. So the shopping center PUD does contain the entire area of the mall, including the movie theater, the restaurants to the east. This property, though, or that we're looking at tonight, is just these two parcels to be subdivided. So as you are probably aware and helped us with provide some feedback on, the Center Village vision was adopted for the site and, in general, the County Road 42 commercial retail area. With this proposal, there are no exterior improvements that the applicant is proposing as part of the application. It's primarily a subdivision with the land use clearances of the PUD amendment and deviations associated with that, as well as a variance, in order to accommodate the subdivision request. And so just to reiterate, we're going through the areas highlighted in blue, but for the Wells Fargo property, which is owned by a separate owner, and not including the anchor properties that surround the site. They are not included as owner of this portion of the subdivision for the mall. So the new proposed plat contains 10 lots and 1 outlot. The PUD amendment, as I mentioned, is necessary for changes to the shopping center. We're going to incorporate some of the deviation requests based on the new lot sizes and situations. There's a variance to Title 11 subdivisions that is related to platted street frontage for one of the lots. And then a big part of the subdivision application is that right-of-way has been dedicated for the proposed Aldrich Avenue extension, which you may remember seeing some visuals of in the Center Village traffic study that followed the Center Village vision. There is areas along County Road 42 where Dakota County did also request some additional dedication at the north property line. So just to quickly kind of go through, this is the proposed Burnsville Center 3rd Edition plat. As I go through my presentation tonight, I am going to go lot by lot and go over kind of the deviations similar as to how I did in my report. So this would be the northwest corner of the property, showing some of the new boundaries, as opposed to the big, giant blue spider from my aerial photo. Before I get into the deviations, I'll quickly talk about the variance, and I'll mention it again when we get specifically to that lot site plan. But there is a subdivision ordinance which requires that every lot must have the minimum frontage on a city-approved street or public road, and otherwise must be approved via a subdivision ordinance variance. The standards for a subdivision ordinance variance or a variance outside of the zoning ordinance are different. It's not judged by practical difficulties, but by unusual hardships, which is a separate definition. The proposed Lot 5 of Block 1 is landlocked, you could say. This is the lot that they are subdividing off. It will contain the existing Schuler Shoes Verizon building, which is currently located in the Dick's Sporting Goods parking field area. The building will continue to be accessed by the internal drive aisle and parking areas. We feel that this is consistent with previous approval of satellite lots. The last time the Burnsville Center was platted in 2005, the movie theater area also had a lot without a street frontage. And because it maintains access within the PUD to a private access drive, staff is supportive of the variance portion needed for the subdivision application. The benefits of the PUD amendment, the proposal will increase the economic viability of the Burnsville Center. Proposal to provide right-of-way for the Aldrich Avenue extension, which was presented in the Center Village traffic study, which was reviewed by the Planning Commission and City Council. The proposed new parcels will provide opportunity for redevelopment and new construction, as you probably read in the narrative letter from the applicant that was included in your packet. They're excited for kind of some new diverse or retail options that they could provide on these satellite lots that is created with the subdivision. And the proposal will allow for these property owners to work with the city to implement the goals of the Center Village vision by moving forwards towards establishing that street grid. We do believe the proposal is consistent with our goal of a diverse and creative retail mix within the Center Village vision, and that the Plat and PUD amendment are a great first step forward in accomplishing the goals of the Center Village vision for the vacant areas of the Burnsville Center and surrounding areas in this retail zone. So to move into the subdivision itself, shown here is Lot 1 of Block 1. There are 3 blocks in this subdivision and as mentioned before, 1 outlot. This is the existing Shogun restaurant lot. So The deviation from the city code that is included as part of this request is a side yard parking setback on this area. So this lot line currently does not exist in the existing subdivision. They are all one large parcel. The lot line has been placed in between the drive aisle area for the Wells Fargo building, or for the Wells Fargo tellers, and then the parking area for Shogun. This is the deviation that is included. There are no other deviations for this particular site. They are already compatible with our green space and other city code standards. There are a few areas where you may expect to see a deviation from city code related to the north property line. Those are not included in this request. The city code does have a provision related to when there is a public improvement project that affects the land taken for that project, where the setbacks would be calculated. In the case of an expansion or a redevelopment, they'd be calculated from the existing setback minus the taking. So that would be evaluated in the event of an expansion or redevelopment. This next lot is the proposed Lot 2 of Block 1. 2 deviations included in this request to allow a lot size of 13,068 square feet as opposed to the minimum 20,000 square feet, and to allow a side yard parking setback again on the shared line of 3.5 feet as opposed to the 10 feet standard. Again, this would be an existing trash enclosure and not included in that deviation request for setbacks from the right-of-way request from Dakota County. And then as for why this property is primarily utilized as it was approved by PUD to be the drive-through area for the Wells Fargo Bank. It is not included on the same lot as the Wells Fargo building. This was approved by PUD in the 90s, and the bank that has been occupying this space has leased this land from the Burnsville Center, and so the portion that is being separated off into a lot is the square footage of that leased area. For the proposed Lot 3, this does include the central area of the mall, and then the mall internal building, and then the split-offs in each direction for access to the entrances to the site, and parking fields, as well as some cases where it's cut off due to the future road extension. There are 4 deviations for this property to allow front yard setback of 7 feet 9 inches. This is the northeast corner. Entrance number 4 of the mall is right here, so it is related to this setback from the building here to the right-of-way, the new right-of-way. And then to allow impervious surface to exceed 75% at 97.3%, to allow the parking lot green space area of 2.7%, or sorry, lot green space of 2.7% as opposed to 25, and then parking lot green space of 1.5 as opposed to 3. Formerly, the Burnsville Mall site did wrap around to the green space that fronted Burnhaven Drive with the right-of-way. That lot has been cut off from that green space, so staff is supportive of these deviations. Lot 4 is this is Dick's Sporting Goods and a number of other retail and restaurant sites. In my background, I did reference that there would be a deviation to the front yard parking setback as it fronts the Aldrich Avenue right-of-way. I inadvertently left this in after making my argument for the right-of-way taking setback issue. So that can be removed from the analysis, and I'll reference that in my city council report. But there are the 2 deviations related to green space. These green space numbers are similar to what the lot had prior to splitting off some of these areas. This former lot did used to contain this area here, which is the lot I'll discuss in a moment, and this lot here. But staff is supportive of these green space and impervious surface proposals as part of the deviation request for the PUD. The proposed Lot 5, oh no, wrong image. So the proposed Lot 5 is this lot right here. And there are 3 deviations included for this property to allow parking lot green space that is reduced, to allow a lot to not maintain required 100-foot lot width at a front lot line or public right-of-way, And then the variance for a similar standard, which is in the subdivision ordinance, as mentioned before, that it does not have street frontage on a city-approved street. So it receives the PUD deviation request for the zoning portion and phrasing of that requirement, as well as the subdivision ordinance variance for the separate standard. And again, would be this lot here, lot 5. Oh no. So for the proposed lot 6, the deviation that is requested is to the west lot line. As I mentioned, this all used to be one lot in the former plat, and so there was no line in this location, so there is a side yard parking setback request to the west lot line. Any expansion or redevelopment of the site, we will review based on the taking standard that I had mentioned before for any north lot line deviations. This is one of the properties where the applicant has provided an exhibit showing that there is some interest in the property. That is not part of what we're reviewing tonight, any sort of like use approvals for new redevelopment or new proposals for buildings. It's just the subdivision that we're looking at, but we did ask them to provide exhibits if they were able, that we could bring forward showing that what they believe that the site could be utilized for as they move forward. So this lot here, we're moving into the second block of the subdivision, and at this point there are no more deviations. They are just lots that will meet the city code zoning requirements. Some do have standards that may affect or may be affected by the right-of-way taking, which would be allowed by an administrative approval, and they're not included as deviations. So shown here, lot 1 of the second block, this is the Jared's building just south of County Road 42, which does meet city code requirements related to green space and impervious surface. And then the next lot, lot 2, we recently viewed this back in March for the Centerpoint Energy Regulator Station relocation. And they do have the easement areas noted on their plans. They are aware of that proposal. And then, again, the lot does meet city code standards in the zoning ordinance. The next lot in the subdivision, lot 3, can be utilized as the existing parking field, and this is another site where the applicant has provided information on what it may be used for, just as a conceptual drawing. The standards of the PUD and the zoning ordinance would be applied to this property when they come forward to redevelop it. It's possible that it may require further PUD amendment. It's possible that they could come in by building permit. It does depend on what is brought forward as the final version of those site plans for staff to review. And they all abut the future Aldrich Avenue, just to point that again. That would be an extension of Aldrich Avenue from the north. The road would rejoin again south of the Sears lot, which they do not own, and continue on to connect into Buck Hill Road. The third block in the plat is this lot here, which is the green space that had been cut off from the remainder of the Burnsville Center property as mentioned. So there'd be anything on this property, nothing is proposed to be changed. There were existing conditions and setbacks that were approved in the last plat that was gone through in 2005. So this existing accessory building was always located this far from drive aisles, this far from the property to the north. So it is already wrapped into previous approvals. And then the last lot in the plat is an outlot. This would be just southeast of their entrance to the mall, where there are some events sometimes held in this parking field. Can continue to be utilized as a parking field as well as the Aldrich Avenue extension until the road is prepared to be constructed. There's some information about that in your engineering and planning considerations section of your staff report. And again, the zoning ordinance and the PUD standards would be applied to the lot when a redevelopment opportunity were to come forward, and because it is an outlot, it would have to be platted into a lot and block of record prior to development. So just some staff considerations for this application. Parking for the PUD as a whole was ironed out in the plan unit development last noted in 1989 as 5 per 1,000 parking spaces as the minimum. The current zoning ordinance actually would ask that the maximum parking for the site to be 5 per 1,000 parking spaces. So there is an excess of parking at the site. It is reviewed for the site as a whole. The entire mall, including the sites not owned by this owner, are what's included in the parking calculation under this PUD. But none of the proposals tonight do include exterior changes, so this is not part of tonight's review, but it would be part of a future review and any building permits that we were to receive. The rezoning from B3 to mixed use, which was conducted in 2019 after the comp plan approval, did result in a new standard, which was the maximum impervious surface coverage, which has been applied in the PUD deviations for some of the lots this evening. And then sites that redevelop following the plat may or may not require that PUD amendment approval, which would come back before the Planning Commission and City Council. As I mentioned before, it does depend on the final proposal that we review. And then landscaping and changes that abut the proposed Aldrich Avenue can also be reviewed at the time that Aldrich Avenue is constructed or at the time that the lots adjacent to it redevelop or expand. Some engineering considerations from our staff. As you may be familiar with, the Burnsville Center Village did call for a redevelopment of the Burnsville site to include an extension of our Aldrich Avenue through the site from County Road 42 to Buck Hill Road. So this has been dedicated on the plat for the future road. Timing on construction is uncertain. We do have language that we'll be including in the plan unit development related to this item that we have discussed with the applicant in meetings and over email, so they're aware, and the language has not changed since it was last provided to the applicant. In its current stance, the right-of-way can be used for parking and drive lane as it is today, but not for construction. So park dedication is due on lots that have a potential for constructing new buildings. The applicant requested deferment until building permit, which the city has indicated that we can accommodate. Overall, staff is recommending approval of the application. There are some conditions associated with that approval. So the first condition is that the condition of previously approved PUDs do remain in full force and effect. That uses listed in the underlying zoning district as permitted and/or accessory uses are allowed in addition to the specific uses in the plan unit development. In the event that residential development is proposed, parking will be calculated for that use separate from the shopping center use of the 5 per 1,000, which is regulated by PUD for the mall site. Condition from our engineering department that if there are any outstanding memo comments from their most recent review of the plat for technical items that they be addressed, and that was attached to your report. And then that the park dedication, as mentioned, are deferred until building permits are applied for each of the lots. It'll be calculated based on the use and the fee schedule at the time of the building permit. And then the last three conditions are related to the language that was provided to the applicant, related to the right-of-way and timing for Aldrich Avenue. So until the city determines that it's time to construct the extension of the Aldrich Avenue, the right-of-way can be used by the underlying fee owners of the right-of-way for parking and drive lane purposes, just as they are today. So the right-of-way area can be surfaced with bituminous materials, but no private utilities or structures can be constructed. And then the city would not have responsibility to compensate owners for any materials or items placed within the right-of-way that are moved, damaged, or destroyed as a result of the construction of the Aldrich Avenue extension, which may be standard language for an easement or something of that sort. And then that construction of the extension is planned in order to accommodate redevelopment of the Burnsville Mall property, and that could include the removal of buildings. It could include portions of buildings being removed, additional multifamily residential, mixed use, density, residential occurring on the east side of the mall site. The road would be needed for access to those higher use and higher density sites, and that is the trigger for construction. And then as part of the PUD approval, that the deviations listed in this report are approved for the lots, but that new and redevelopment projects on the site will be evaluated further for deviations independently from this approval. So with that, again, staff's recommending approval of this application. It is a public hearing this evening. We do have members of the applicant team available to answer questions if needed, and I can stand for questions now.
Thank you, Ms. Madden. That was a lot to kind of explain, and you did a great job of it. Appreciate it. Any questions for city staff before we get over to the applicant? Seeing none, we'll move on to the applicant. And is that Mr. Resnick?
I think I unmuted it. Hi,
Hi. If you could just state your name and the address for the record.
can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Sure, Felix Resnick, 4,000 Island Boulevard, Aventura, Florida,
Thank you.
33160. I think there's a little delay in the, there's a little delay with the connection for some reason.
Oh, sure. That's fine. We'll work with it. Do you have any comments to make about the project, or?
I just, we went through quite a few changes here, and I'm very happy to make everybody's acquaintance here today. I believe that if you're stagnant with respect to one of these types of properties, then you're asking for it to go down just the way it went down with the prior owners. Not necessarily faulting them for anything, but I think you need to be active and creative with these types of properties. And in the last, I'd say, 3 years, we've been able to bring a lot of interesting uses to these properties, including multifamily mixed use, which I think will work very well over here. Unfortunately, the best lot for it is probably the Sears lot, which we don't own or control. But maybe together with the, I think it's now about 7 acres down in just between the Sears lot and the JCPenney lot. Between those 7 acres and the 15 that make up the Sears, I think you could accomplish most of the vision that the city of Burnsville had for high density mixed use project here, and we totally support it. I understand that having 500 to 700 people wake up in the morning and go into the mall or come back from work and go in and shop and eat is that helps the mall tremendously. So we're completely in support of that.
Thank you. I want to say I appreciate your working with the plan. I was a part of the commission that put together the plan, and I'm really excited to see this move forward. And I really appreciate your working with the city and doing what we can to make this a very viable property, and I think that's very important for the city. So really appreciate you coming in today. Any questions for the applicant? Commissioner Timmerman.
Mr. Resnick, I'm just going to echo what Commissioner John said. I think it's great to finally get a little bit of information from our new Burnsville Center owner. I think that we're going to ask a lot of you and expect a lot of you, and you should anticipate seeing a lot of us and the city council. And I think that's a good thing. I think you'll learn, and you probably have already to this point, that the city staff is great to work with. A couple of the questions I have are just about feelings, opinions. I think we all look at statute and law and data all the time. But when it comes to the Burnsville Center that was built in the 80s, there's some nostalgia to the Burnsville Center. And there's also some excitement about what could eventually come. And when I look at what you've proposed here, I think it sets a stage for some future development, which will obviously help your organization financially to then reinvest in the Burnsville Center and in the area, and I think that's great. And there needs to be a starting point. And the city of Burnsville did a lot of that work setting that stage. So I guess my comment is I would really like to see kind of your vision for this property. I know the city put out their vision. They worked tirelessly for well over a year on doing that, seeking a lot of feedback from residents, business owners, property owners. So I guess my comment to you is I'd really like to see something grander. I'd like to see something that plays a little bit more off of what the city has done in what you think might work for this area. So not really a question, but it's feels, it's opinions, it's because this is going to get people in Burnsville excited. And I think we have a great opportunity to work together to get folks excited. I'd love to see you or representatives from your organization really outselling this too. And I know we're early on, but let's really bottle that excitement and share it with other people in the city.
We're very open. I visited the center and met with some of the people from the city back in July. And, you know, I think it's just got a lot of potential. It's in a great spot. I was, you know, I was very impressed with what's going on around the center. I think there's just a lot of potential here. But again, it takes some time. Recently closed on a deal to bring a hospital to a former Sears that was closed for 8 years in Midland, Michigan. And I'm doing a mixed-use project. We're now in contract in Sanford, which is a suburb of Orlando. So we're doing this all over the place, but it takes a little bit of time. I just think it's a no-brainer for somebody to scoop up the Sears and the other acreage and create something really, really interesting and creative here for, you know, maybe, you know, some really good livable space, maybe garden-style apartments, maybe something with a little more density. I'm not sure. We don't develop, but we attract the developers, and we try to work with the city to make sure that it fits, you know, kind of their vision too. So I'm excited about it. I'm open.
Awesome. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions from the commissioners? Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Resnick. And again, that's the number one question I get when people find out I'm on the planning commission is, what's going on with the mall? So I'm excited we have a great partner here, and really excited to work with you in the future here. Any other comments, questions? Maybe a motion, I don't know. Oh, we got the public hearing. Public hearing, thank you, thank you. It is 8:17. I would like to open up the public hearing to anybody that is either on Zoom, in person, or on the phone. And if you are on the phone, you can dial, I believe it's *6. Someone?
Yes.
*6 to unmute yourself and tell the moderator that you're on the phone. I'd like to speak to this issue. It sounds like nobody is on Zoom nor on the phone. So at 8:18, I would like to close our public hearing. And now, any discussion on the proposal, or we would entertain a motion? Commissioner Awad?
I'll just echo the sentiment that this is exciting to see this move ahead. It's the first step in really achieving the vision. So I'd be happy to make the motion if you could put it back up on the screen. Okay, so I move that we recommend to the city council approval of the application subject to the 8 conditions listed, which I won't read.
Thank you, Commissioner Awad. A motion has been put on the floor. Do I have a second? Commissioner Wallace?
I'll second.
All right, motion by Commissioner Awad, seconded by Commissioner Wallace. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Anyone oppose? It is unanimous. It will be on the consent agenda for our September 21st city council meeting, which is going to be on a Tuesday at 5:30 in this very chambers. Thank you, Ms. Madden, for the presentation, and we can move on to our next item on the agenda. And item number 5 is our zoning code review, R1 and R1A residential discussion. And I believe this one is being held by Regina Dean. Ms. Dean, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair John, members of the commission. So I'm going to actually turn it over to Kim Lindquist with WSB. She'll be walking you through the discussion of the R1 and R1A sections of the zoning code and giving you a brief update on some of the survey results that we've had so far. I do have to load the PowerPoint presentation, so if I just have a minute to do that. And,
Sure. And we can fill in.
She's gonna sing some show tunes.
Yeah, we'll do a song and dance. Commissioner Wallace?
Pass, thanks.
Okay. Just wanted to put that out there.
Okay, we're good to go.
Good deal. Thank you, Ms. Dean.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I'm excited to be here. In part, this is one of my first big WSB projects. So I used to work over down the street in Rosemont for the last 17 years. So I'm pretty familiar with Burnsville and was interested in the couple items that were here earlier at the meeting. Don't envy you guys at all. So this looks like a piece of cake in comparison to some of those meetings. I wanted to just briefly remind folks, why we're here today doing the zoning ordinance, and it's really, clarity, understanding, inclusion, making it much more user-friendly for both the residents, but also the staff. I mean, we want to make sure the staff can easily access the information, that we're being consistent with giving out that information and making sure it's applied evenly to the residents. And so the goal of this is to make it, as everyone says, more user-friendly, with the idea then that hopefully residents can kind of look through some of these areas and really decide for themselves, can they build that deck, can they do this or that. So one of the things we did is start out with the single family or the one family residential districts, which the R1A and the R1 cover the vast majority of the community. And so the assumption is that those are the ones people are most familiar with, and they really affect them in their neighborhood. And so hopefully we got good feedback on the couple of engagement processes we did. But I'm hoping that that's just really the start, and that maybe people will become more engaged in total. So I think many of you are aware, and I know that you received the information, but I'm going to just run through a couple of these engagement pieces that we did do. Many of you are aware we do have a website, so it's linked through the city system, and it goes directly to the update where we're posting the various sections of the ordinance. We've also got a short page that just says of these upcoming events. So we were at one of the patio
Party on the Plaza.
Party on the Plaza. I knew there was a bunch of P's, thank you. And then we were just at Fire Muster last weekend, really just drumming up some interest. So the first one, we tried to get the people to do the survey, and then most recently, we started embarking on just kind of what people liked in commercial areas. And you'll notice in the survey and the information that you received, is we're really trying to do kind of a preference survey. I think people, you say, gee, do you like section 12? Nobody really is gonna go with that. But we've got these photos, and we're trying to get people to say, well, I like more green space in the backyard. I don't like people parking in driveways. And then it translates ultimately to the ordinance criteria. Unfortunately, if you look at the information that we got from the survey, you see that residents are pretty happy with the status quo. So, you know, we're like 24 feet, 30 feet, 36 feet for driveways, and what do? They sit with what's the norm. Regina and I were just talking, do you want more hard surface, or do you know, want less in the backyard and the front yard? Goes in at 50%. You know, it's just, so I think, you know, either people are moving to the mean, or in reality, people are generally comfortable with what Burnsville's doing. I mean, they like the community, they clearly are staying here long, and so they're not really asking for a lot of changes. I did note, you know, one of the first items was just some information about, you know, what they liked, and some of it is well beyond the ordinance. You know, I like parks, I like open space, I like landscape areas, I like neighbors that upkeep their property. But I think it's important because, again, it translates to, we want to have enough land on the property so that people have some space, they have the landscaping opportunities. So not that we're making everybody do those things, but it gives people the opportunity to have that future deck, or have that additional shrubbery or landscaping, or have a little sense of privacy. And so some of those answers did kind of make sense in terms of the ordinance, but a lot of them are really just, you know, a little bit beyond the bounds of our project. Maybe it deals more with some of the updates you're doing in other ones. So I'm gonna just briefly go through this. No one's going to be able to read this, but I wanted to point out the R1 is probably, again, the most important for many residents because of its impact. And so what you'll see in, for those people who aren't used to editing, red is additional language, strikeout means we're taking it out, and then we took that third piece of outlining it in yellow. Those were areas where the WSB staff or the city staff were like, this might be something that we want to have a bit more conversation on, but it's not really a technical answer. It's maybe a little bit more of a policy. What do you think? And so we did get some feedback from the folks that looked at it ahead of time, but I did want to point that out again for conversation. And so I had a memo in your packet that has quite a listing of topics that are somewhat related to some of the highlighted yellow, and then also take it a step further. And so I feel like we should maybe have a bit of a conversation about the R1. I think, again, this is probably the most important and really sets the tone. And so if you look at this page, we're, you know, which I'm glad many of you mentioned, and the item at the beginning, it talks about having a basement or not, having a pitched roof or not, some exterior material requirements, and then a elevation issue, which is primarily an engineering issue, which I'm not sure that's been satisfactorily resolved. And then the remaining portion talks about permitted uses. We've added some essential services, just more trails and sidewalks. We added some items about accessory uses that are probably, should be in there and weren't, or maybe weren't overly regulated, but probably should have been, or acknowledged, like flagpoles, gazebos, pool houses, just providing more clarity. You know, a lot of those things would have been under accessory structures. But we're just making sure that people understand them. And you'll also note that one of the things is we've tried to say, like, shed regulated in 10.7.4. So then, again, from a user perspective, that person can, instead of trying to, you know, circle around, you can go to the next section and find it. And then, really, there hasn't been too many changes, and we've gotten rid of some of the interim uses. So I'm interested if we can have a little bit of a conversation about some of these yellow highlighted areas, and really anything in the R1. The goal tonight is to try to maybe come to some agreement on a few of these items so we can make that, them reflected in the ordinance. What we're gonna do from a process standpoint is this piece, along with later this month, the remainder portion of the residential will be before you. We'll go to the council mid-October for a conversation about this, and then ultimately, hopefully after all that input and conversation, we'll be able to come to you shortly thereafter with a draft ordinance for approval, so that we can kind of wrap up the residential. So I'm gonna stop here. I guess I should say one more thing. I didn't make a copy of it for the PowerPoint, but hopefully you've got that in your packet. The memo had a table of items that are not, maybe, some of them not directly related to the language in the ordinance. And a lot of them fall, I think, under that inclusion diversity issue. That's really one of the goals of this exercise. And I kind of put a lot of them more towards the end and said, this is a policy decision for the city. You know, should the house sizes be smaller, you know, so it's more affordable? Should we consider a different ordinance that even allows smaller lots so that more people can come into the community? You know, those types of things. And I think the only thing I would say on a few of those is that we should evaluate whether some of those ideas really will get the city where it wants to go. Because Burnsville is so developed, you're not getting so many new houses that building one smaller house is gonna really move the needle very far. So there might be other ideas the city needs to look to meet some of those inclusion goals that aren't necessarily restructuring of the ordinance, simply because of where you are in your development framework. You might just not get the bang for the buck that you might be looking for. So that's just a thought. So I'm hoping there's a little conversation.
Thank you. So we are at 2 hours now. If someone wants to make a motion for a break, if necessary, we can definitely do that. I would like to give full attention to this conversation, not be hurrying to get out. Is there anyone that would
I'd
like
like to make a motion for a 4.5 minute break.
4.5 minute break by Commissioner Timmerman. Do I have a second? Second by Commissioner Awad. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? 4.5 minute break. We will return at 8:36. And I would like to welcome everyone back, and I want to, again, begin the meeting, return from recess. And we were about to have a discussion on the R1 and R1A residential, one-family residential district section of the city code. Any comments or discussion openers? Commissioners?
I'm just kind of curious what, Ms. Lindquist, what your, I guess, how do you want to do this? Do you want to go through the ordinance like it's listed, or through the comments in the table you provided? I guess,
Yeah, I think we probably need to at least touch on both.
Okay.
So, I know it's getting kind of late, but hopefully we can dispose of a few of them a little quicker. The ones in the ordinance are kind of the ones that are right on the screen, are the main ones. So again, it's kind of that pitched roof and cellar basement, exterior materials, and then the elevation piece. So I guess I'd be interested in any feedback.
Well, we have a resident architect on hand, Commissioner Wad.
Thank you. Are you just looking for, so, like I sent in comments via email. Are you just looking for some elaboration on that, or we're talking about the items in yellow in general?
Yeah, I
Okay.
think primarily the yellow ones, because the other ones, I think we've pretty comfortable about.
Okay.
I think really the answer is, you know, people commented, but it might be one person here and one person on a different one. And so we are trying to get a little bit more like, yeah, everybody's on board, or not.
Okay, I'll start out by saying I'm not opposed to a slab-on-grade home, and I think part of the challenge is to make it not look, yeah, I mean, part of the reason people have been opposed to them in the past is that they look cheap, they are less expensive, you don't have to dig a basement. It's a great opportunity for, you know, for one-level living. It's a great opportunity to have heated, you know, to get heated floors, since that main level is a concrete slab. And if it's done right, it doesn't necessarily have to look cheap. And piggybacking on that, we've had an ordinance opposing flat roofs on houses. And I think, again, the perception in the past has been that's a kind of a cheap or inexpensive way to build a house. And I think that's no longer the case. I feel like a flat roof now generally is more expensive than a pitched roof on a house. And so, and there are a lot of modern, you know, a lot of very contemporary houses that have flat roofs. And so I think both of those things should be, that's my opinion, both should be allowed.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Commissioner Wad, there's also the metal roof. Wasn't that something that?
Metal roofing is another thing, yeah, it's, has been, you know, prohibited, and again, there are a lot of nice homes that have metal roofs, and I think the reason that metal roofs were disallowed is because that was a tin roof was a cheap roof that you find on a, you know, like a barn type building or a rural building. And then metal roofing has become a kind of a premium roofing product, and.
Right, and that's under K.
Oh, there it
So we
is.
did get some feedback
Yeah.
from folks, and so we ended up stating that we were okay with the metal roof. And then, but it was limited to like shake, shingle, slate, or standing seam and tiles. So often it doesn't look like metal, although the standing seam would be. So,
If I could just say, so we actually allowed, or used to be standing seam was conditional use permit. We changed that, can't remember the time, but sometime in 2020. And so what the changes that are proposed here are just to rephrase how we described that section. So they had been permitted by administrative building permit at least for about a year, for standing seam in particular.
and then we've got that red, you know, we're adding specifically no galvanized or unfinished steel or aluminum, which gets at the comment, you know, about the barn kind of.
Right.
I have another question, if that's okay.
Go ahead, floor's open.
And I didn't notice this, there's, one of the things that I has come up in the past is accessory structures, so like a detached garage or a shed in your backyard. We have not regulated, we regulate the height of the building, but we don't regulate the sidewall height. And I think the height can be like 16 feet, which means you could have a 14-foot sidewall and a very shallow pitched roof, which if your neighbor doesn't want to see it, they can't build a fence high enough to hide that, is what I recall from one of the things we've experienced here in the planning commission.
So if I just might add a little commentary on that. So we have our accessory structure regulations specifically in, is it Chapter 10, Chapter 10, Title 10, Chapter 7, thank you, Sarah. Title 10, Chapter 7, which speaks to sidewalls and maximum height and maximum square footage for if it needs a zoning permit or if it doesn't need a zoning permit, and then when a conditional use permit is triggered. And so we do have some of that, but it's in a different chapter. So in the R1 section, we talk more about placement of that structure and if it's allowed or not. And then we get into those details in that other chapter, which will come to you at another point.
Stay tuned.
Yes.
Okay, great. I'll hold off then.
Anyone that wants to make a comment, please. feel
I was
free.
just looking at, like, as an example with F that is crossed out, due to the garbage and refuse, needing to be covered. And is that because the code was changed a year or two ago in reference to that?
It is handled as far as refuge in a different section of the city code. I can't remember if it's Title 3 or 5. It's a different section of the full city code. So we didn't want to double reference it.
So stand by and be aware in the future. Gotcha.
I think that was kind of the challenge reviewing, going through this first chapter, is that it's kind of a broad chapter, and a lot of the stuff that we're interested in is a little bit more into the weeds, I would think. But we have to start somewhere, right? I agree with Commissioner Wad regarding, almost everything he says always. I think the pitched roof, frankly, when you have an architect telling you that a flat roof is desirable, and you drive through other communities such as areas in Florida where a flat roof is pretty common, and it looks amazing if it's done right. I don't think we should limit people to being creative. I don't think we need to make it a burden for them to be creative on building their homes. The same is true with, building on slab versus having a basement or a cellar. I think that one of the things that you talked about was that we are really trying to look at all of this ordinance review through the lens of making life easier for the citizens of Burnsville, making our ordinances and life in general more accessible. And I think that having something on slab creates an opportunity for more affordable housing. Maybe not necessarily the affordable housing that is generally talked about, but it's definitely affordable housing for those trying to get into a single-family neighborhood. The other thing that has been going through my mind is that we aren't going to have new developments. These are all things for the most part, going to be for houses that are being snuck into a certain area, kind of like we saw earlier tonight. There was this random vacant lot, and there's not a lot of that in Burnsville. So I think we don't need to be really heavy-handed on blanket policy. So do we need to even talk about flat roofs? Do we even need to talk about things that are allowed in ordinance? I guess my question is, if we don't talk about them in ordinance at all, doesn't that mean it's allowed?
Correct. So for example, we would literally take out H and I if you would consider them. So there wouldn't be the prohibition, right?
Right.
If I may add, we do have a section, and this is something that, I don't know if our attorney can speak to now or if needs more analysis on it, but we have a section that talks about, and it's something to the sense of if it's not listed, it's prohibited. And I think that's some language that we need some attention on. It's not in this section, but again, a different way of looking at our city code and what, how can we tweak that language to encompass more things and be more flexible? Because that language can be a double-edged sword, I think.
Are you talking, Regina, are you talking about that in one of the other chapters, not in the zoning code, or is it in the zoning?
It's in zoning.
Okay. We will have to take a look at that.
Are you saying more the opposite, where it's, if it's not listed, it's not prohibited?
If it's,
I've seen that generally, though, it's in uses, so if the use isn't expressly permitted, it's prohibited. I haven't necessarily seen it as it relates to, like, every aspect. Like you don't say you have to have a house with a roof. You don't have to say that out loud, so we'll just have to take a look at it and make sure it covers where we want to be.
We hope you don't have to say it out loud, but
We've
maybe you do.
adopted the building code, so I mean, we're going to have roofs on our houses.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? You
Yes,
don't have to say it
absolutely.
out. Yeah.
I did want to ask about the 18 inches above center for the front entryway. I don't understand that at all.
What it's really for is that the house is elevated above the road, so it drains towards, the stormwater, so you don't have issues. Some of the cities I've worked in, like you have walkouts, so you've got backyard drainage, and so, it's just so therefore, you don't have the same issue necessarily either. Some of times it just, you bring it all the way around. So I think we're hoping for more input from the engineer on that piece.
Yeah, I think that would be ideal because, I mean, it's hard to have vague language if you're going to have language at all. But I think something along the lines of, we require adequate drainage to be approved by the city engineer or something,
Right.
pretty
Right.
broad like that. Because that's a very specific ordinance that seems like there's a lot of alternatives to it.
Could be in our Title 11 plat and data requirements, what's required for submittal of a plat. Possibly, because it's basically saying, when you submit the plat, you have to indicate the elevation of the entryway. So we could put it in Title 11, but again, engineer.
Well, I think if people are open to be flexible on that, we might move it somewhere, but we'll address, obviously, the interest is good drainage and keeping it away from the house.
Right.
But however that's phrased. Okay, excellent. I don't have anything highlighted here. I think this information is fairly non-controversial, but I'm certainly open to any comments people have. And then after that, we're really not changing too much. A little bit with the setbacks. I know there was one, there were a couple comments, and maybe I'll just stay on this page. These are the reduction piece, so you have the regular side yard, front yard, rear yard, but there's the ability to have some reduction. And maybe you might want to just take a quick glance at that and see if you're comfortable about that. It's if this, then that. So, the side yard, it can go down to 5 if it's for an attached garage, can't be in the easements. I think the comment we received was on the rear yard. They're a little concerned. The setback can be reduced from 30 to 20 if the maximum from the structure from one to the other is 40. And so the concern was that you're kind of not doing a setback from lot lines, you're actually doing it from another structure on a different parcel, which tends to be something that you'd like to avoid in ordinances. On the other hand, I still think you end up with 40, so I'm not sure it would be, I mean, it would have to have been that you had an existing non-conforming house to be able to not make the 40. So then you unfortunately get penalized because your neighbor to the rear already got a break, is what that would mean.
Yeah, if I could comment, that I made that comment,
Okay.
I think, and it didn't seem right that you explained it exactly. If your neighbor is non-conforming, that prohibits you from being able to expand per the.
Take advantage of the reduction.
Take advantage of the reduction.
Right.
So you're being controlled by something off of your property, which conceptually didn't quite seem right. I don't have the answer, but.
Yeah.
You do have the comments.
I mean, the option would be you either give them the 20, because if you feel good enough about going down to 20, do you really care that much about your neighbor? You know what the neighbor's setback
Yeah.
is, because presumably you'd like to think they've complied also. And it's only under the circumstance of, for attached grade living space. So it's a very specific exception, not for all additions, which, I mean, this is not really gleaned from the survey, but, I mean, I think as communities, you've pretty much got your construction set, people are going to be looking at more expansion opportunities if you want to kind of maintain some of your existing residents. And so some flexibility, I think, does make sense for the community under certain conditions. Not a whole-scale change of setbacks, but maybe under certain circumstances.
I believe we've come across a couple of times where we need to define what the front yard is compared to what the backyard is. We have what's called double frontage lot. Is there room for that in this language here to make that definition standard? We were working on, I think it was screening of trash containers, and we were having a heck of a time because what constituted as a front yard or a backyard, and those.
So in the city code, in the definition section, the front lot line or the front yard is defined as the lot line with the shortest amount of frontage on the road. So in a double frontage lot, the zoning front is the shortest front.
On a corner lot, but not a through lot.
I thought it was on a through lot too.
We have-
No. Okay.
We're trying to simplify.
Well, while we're on it,
Yeah.
on a lakefront, is the front door to the lake or to your driveway? Totally unrelated, but there's a lot of argument about that issue.
Well, that's a fair question.
Well, we're not in the definition section, but we can take a look at that.
I think there's always gonna be kind of the oddball lot that doesn't quite fit everything. And even this 40-foot, to 20-foot to 30-foot to 20-foot reduction based on your neighbor, there's, I don't know that it's worth spending a lot of time talking about it, because it's gonna be a kind of a one-off situation if it pops up, so. Just to throw that out there.
And I think that's a good point, and that's why maybe because these are all one-off, isn't this all very specific when we're rarely gonna run into some of these issues?
I think the issues that we're talking about are kind of specific. I think the changes that are in front of us are about ways to reduce your setback, which gives people more opportunities to expand their houses and improve the housing stock in the city. And so I think in general, this is a great thing to do and a great move.
It's a good improvement, but why not just make it 20 feet, period? why all of the if this, then that?
Well, I would say in that particular case, it's very specific for living space, so you want to keep your resident, but it isn't necessarily for garage, because you just don't want, that whole idea of maybe de-emphasizing the garage a little bit, so you don't want to do it for that. It's like a hierarchy of additions to your home, which you can buy into or not, but.
Are you familiar with the city council's decision on a huge garage and driveway on the west part of the city?
Is that the picture you sent me? I am familiar with that.
I agree with you, but I don't know that the city council agrees, as far as prioritizing certain size, because I think the whole concept of this is to make things easier. It is pouring out, I can hear it right now. But to make things easier, more accessible, more plain language, and when I'm just kind of trying to set the tone of what you're gonna get out of me, at least through our future discussions, is that if there's something that seems arduous or too detailed, I'm going to ask, why does it need to be this detailed? And when I look at each of these, I mean, anything about meeting a certain standard for reduction, why not just make the ordinance allow it? So, as an example, the side yard setback may be reduced to 5 feet. Why don't we just call it 5 feet? The rear yard setback shall be 30, may be reduced to 20. Why don't we just call it 20?
I feel pretty confident about this answer. If you make the side yard setback 5 feet, you will have people come in with variances for 2 feet. People, they will now set everything at the 5, where this is just saying, if you need a little room for an attached garage, we'll give you a little extra.
I think we just approved a variance at Burnsville Center for 1.5 feet. I mean, they're gonna come in.
That's totally different, though.
No, I know, but they're gonna come in with the request for what they need regardless.
What they need or what they want.
I think the idea is to be flexible with what they want, isn't it?
Well, I think that's up to the city. I mean, there's flexibility, but there's also clarity. I mean, that's part of the goal here is, people often, in my experiences, they want to know what they can do. They don't want to say like, well, I can do 10, but I could do 5, but I could do 7. They just want to know. And then, the majority of them will go away and draw their addition to meet that. And then you'll have the few that are the ones you see.
Just want to point out that the 5-foot reduction for an attached garage, that's always been there. Really, the only change is clarifying that it's an attached garage rather than the garage. So materially, we're not changing anything in that particular.
Right.
And then clarifying we're avoiding any drainage and utility easements, which kind of almost in some ways doesn't need to be said because you can't encroach on those anyway.
And then striking that 15-foot
Oh,
distance requirement from neighbor to neighbor.
Right, yeah. I like it.
I like it fine. I think you're going to get some pushback from a few members of the city council that it's not enough. And so that's kind of where my comments and thoughts are. I'm fine with it. I'm fine with tweaks to ordinances that we think already work pretty well and making them a bit more flexible. But I think you'll get a lot of comments of, okay, the idea of this is to start with a blank slate, not to make minor tweaks.
Any other thoughts on the R1?
I think it's, more clarified language, simpler to read. The one question I guess I have is, I see where you marked out structure and made it building, yet garage you marked out, or then you added structure. So I'm just Just as a
Yep.
point.
Yeah, we'll have to be a little more careful about that. Appreciate that.
Good catch.
Well, let's run through the R1A, which is fairly minor. And then I just wanted to kind of end with a couple of those items on the table, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Here's the R1A. That's got the metal roof piece. It's all removed. Which, I don't know if there's a reason for that. Regina, the consistency piece, it should probably be the same, right?
Good question, we'll have to look at that.
It's because it's quoting the special minimum requirements, so it depends on if we want to restate what was already in the special minimums of R1. Like, which is what the city council kind of wants us to do, is not have people having to flip back and forth.
So keep it then in R1A, the language.
I
have
would want it to
stricken.
reference back, but I know that our direction was that they don't want people to flip back and forth, so.
And when we say R1A, we're mainly talking about the larger acreage
Right.
lots.
Yep.
Southeast or southwest Burnsville.
Yeah, the one family rural, right.
So when you say flip back and forth, you mean your understanding is the direction is to put the language in both places?
I think some of the discussion that was when they were first proposing a city code update was that many areas of our city code will have references to other chapters, and that to find an answer to one question, you may have to look multiple places, and that they wanted to be straightforward in the code. So I guess they could go either way. We could reference it again. But then would we reference all of the special requirements section, because we wouldn't want to treat some areas differently. The reason it's called out separately specifically is because R1A always allowed standing seam, whereas R1 did not, unless by conditional use permit, until last year. So I guess it's up to the commission to decide if we want to continue to just reference that the same requirements apply in both districts, or to spell out each requirement again.
Could we await direction from the council?
When we have our check-in in October, that's something that we can bring up, you know. I think as we're getting into the details, we're trying to find our way, and so I think it would be a good check-in opportunity to bring that up.
I think that's a good example to use this particular item.
One of the things we are doing that I had mentioned in the memo is we put together a table, and we'll have that. So instead of, it'll be the setbacks, so in the lot size, so that table, a dimensional one, and then you'll also have the uses. So often what happens with the uses is you keep going back, you know, and then it lists all the conditions, and like for a conditional use permit, you go back. However, it is kind of nice, because your ordinance is already pretty big, and if you've, you know, got a gas station and you've got this many conditions and you're doing that in, you know, 3 or 4 different districts, you know, you just start multiplying your space, which, while you can find it, but it's also just unwieldy in a different way. So we're hoping by the table, you know, then you can at least do people can quickly find some information. That's probably the most things that they use, you know, in terms of lot size, setback, and uses. And then you can kind of dive into the ordinance for the more, you know, the more details for all those people who want to read all that. So I think that will help kind of split the middle about, you know, repeating some things but not having to repeat everything.
When we look at this, are we looking at it in a published form, or are we looking at it as an online form? As in, are there links that could take you to one place or the other?
So when you look at the ordinance itself, when it'll come before you at public hearing time, it'll look, it'll have the red line strike through and very likely, and the new sections. So it won't be integrated into, or won't be codified into the code. Like, you can't go onto the website and look at the information. It'll be brought to you in, I guess,
Right,
a different
right.
format.
But I mean, as far as what the code's gonna look like when we look at it, are we looking at writing it as an online document, or will it be a paper document?
It will be an online document. We're switching to a new codifier soon, and we'll be able to make live edits into the document. Once they're approved by council, we'll be able to type right in and have those published, and there will be clicky links, I guess, in
Right.
in the ordinance itself, or the codified version.
And with our current codified version, some areas are clickable links that will trace you back to what it's referencing, but most of them are not. Most of them are just a written reference that you would have to table of contents it yourself.
Seems to me, I mean, the happy medium is get more clickable links in there and try not to repeat language if necessary.
Yeah, that's where I was going with on that, yeah. I was going the long route, but.
I like the table visual too. Sounds good.
All right. And then probably the big change, I'm just refreshing my memory, is just these interim uses. So this is one where they reference the R1, and we called them out, and it varies slightly from the straight up R1. And so, all seems like reasonable uses, but just want to call that out. All right. I guess the last thing I had was any of the items from the table, and I would say a few of them, I'm just gonna read them, because I don't know if you all have them, and I apologize, I didn't put it in the thing. So parking standards for religious organizations, we'll take care of that. I think it's just a clarity about how the parking standards are listed. Rooming houses, I think that I'll end up getting covered under short-term rentals, because it doesn't really matter what we called it, Airbnb, rooming house. So we'll, that's one of the things that we would intend to do to kind of address, topical issues. So then we have the roof pitching.
On the rooming house, is that a lot of cities taking a look at those types of, putting them in the ordinances? Is this a happening thing now?
Yeah, not rooming house per se, but the short-term rental for the
Right.
Airbnb, yes. Because often they are nuisances for neighborhoods.
Right, so it would be best to add that,
Right.
okay.
Right. Oh, this was a question that is kind of that lot building size. Why add unnecessary living space just so you can expand your garage? This was actually a resident who wanted to add on to his garage, but he would have had to add on to the house because of the, the percentage. And so typical of most communities, your garage still is somewhat accessory, and so there's usually a limit so that your living space isn't overshadowed by the garage size. So I'm kind of assuming most of the cities are okay with that. Some nods, okay.
We are.
Flat roof, metal roof. Okay, and so then the real issues are these, above, well, this is actually interesting, the above-ground living space, so it was that issue about the reduction in the rear. And so the question is, what is above-ground living space? is it attached living space or porch is what it lists, but so then it's not a deck, it's not a patio, and screened porch, it's not included, so it was specific. And so that might be something that you want more flexibility. It was kind of specific. And the 10, 12, 5.
Where was that one?
Looks like it's about 4 from the bottom there.
10, 12, 5.
Okay.
Oh, for the front yard, so attached living area or porch to the principal building. So it's pretty specific about it just being living space or porch. Which, because it was that specific, I assumed it doesn't mean like a deck.
Generally, when reviewing building permits, that standard is applied to like an attached four-season porch or sunroom or something like that. That is an addition on the back of the house, a smaller addition and not a full home increase towards the rear lot line.
I guess my question is, are all of those things defined in the ordinance definitions?
I would have to check.
I mean, we're gonna have to start defining a lot of stuff if I don't know.
And the issue with definitions, they change over time. We were talking internally as a staff about definitions, and one of the examples I had mentioned was data centers. And I know this has nothing to do with R1 and R1A, but back when the code was created, it was people in cubes on phones and, person after person after person. Today, data centers mean storage for computers, and maybe, 1 to 2 people occupy the building at any given time, and so they have totally different meanings, but, yeah.
Well, and I wonder with this one, if the building code that we've adopted defines these items, in which case we don't really need to redefine them.
Well, I feel like the rear yard one, so it says living area or porch in the front yard, but in the rear yard one, it says attached above grade living space. Which, it's kind of like living area, but I think living space is a fairly broad thing, frankly. People do a lot of living in a lot of not very enclosed spaces. So.
As much as possible.
We want to be, right, it's Minnesota after all. So maybe we can just work on clarifying that, I guess is. And then, as I mentioned, there's just these issues about kind of this equity issue for reducing the home size down to 750, reduce costs by creating a new zoning which splits the lots or other kind of buildable area, or the idea about modifying parking requirements. So now you require a certain size for garage, and is there any interest in not requiring that in terms of mass transit, ride sharing, other options, and not requiring so much garage space? So those are probably a little beyond the normal zoning ordinance conversation. And
They are, but I think they're exactly, that's exactly the type of example that I'm interested in, want to get, digging into is, we have no green space. And we do not, if you ask people around the city if there's affordable housing in Burnsville, the answer is absolutely not. Do I want my R1 neighborhood to have every house split? And it's kind of like the example we had earlier. It's like, I don't. But do I think that there's a way we can do it in this city? I think that's what we need to explore, is how can we, where can we? And the hard thing is, I don't think any one person has the answer to that, but it is a great great concept. I mean, Minneapolis went crazy by saying, look, we're getting rid of all of our, single-family requirements, and I don't know that Burnsville, you know, just the way that our neighborhoods are set up are, if that's feasible. But I mean, this is the type of thing I'd like to have like longer discussions on, not at the end of a 3-hour meeting.
Right, right. Well, and there's kind of two issues, frankly. I mean, there's the ordinance piece, and then there's a policy that really
Right.
says we're making this concerted effort in this neighborhood where it works, or, you know, I think too, you want to really evaluate the impact that you can create by doing a few of these options potentially.
Yeah.
Right. So, because it's getting at the end of a long meeting, those are really the comments and questions we had on these two topics. And so we're obviously, anything that you think of or you want to have a more discussion on or modification, happy to get it. And then I think I'm planning on seeing you in 2 weeks for the other section.
We'll look forward to it. Thank
Well,
you so much. We appreciate your time and hanging in there with us for our 3-hour marathon today.
Can we put her earlier in the meeting?
I mean, that could be helpful, yes. And with that, we're gonna move on to number 6 on the agenda, and that is announcements. Commission, any announcements for the meeting? Staff, any announcements?
Just the general basic one for me, that your next planning commission meeting is Monday, September 27th. And we should have the rezoning public hearing related to the recent mixed-use comp plan amendment that went forward earlier this year. It was approved by the Metropolitan Council and adopted by the City Council in a final resolution last month. So that will be moving forward with the rezoning public hearing. And then Regina, do you have anything you need to add?
I believe we'll have, is it Caliber, coming in for is it a CUP? Do you recall?
PUD amendment.
Okay, PUD amendment, related to some tanks that they have on site and citing the location. So, that'll be before you, and then our multifamily zoning district discussion, will be before you as well.
Great. Thank you so much. And with that, we'll move on to number 7 on our agenda, and that's adjournment. Any motion to adjourn?
I'll make you.
A motion made by Commissioner Wallace. Anyone available to second that? Commissioner Timmerman.
Second.
With that, all in favor to adjourn, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? No one opposed. Okay, well, thank you for hanging in with us. Have a great night.